Okay, so have you all read this story? Has anybody not read it? Anybody ready to bit? Anybody not ready to bit? Everybody's ready to bit. Right. Okay, so I was talking about this last week, going through the first part of the story, talking about the two shepherds who came across Milarepa on their, as they were wandering by, they came across Milarepa, and the younger one got engaged in conversation with him and ended up with Milarepa saying to him, well, you should go home and look at your mind. What does he say exactly? Milarepa said, as to whether the mind is one or many, look for yourself. And the young man goes off and he comes back with his reply, and we started looking at the reply. And talking about the mind, whether it was one or many. And the shepherd boy decides there's one mind. I wondered if any of you had been thinking about it meantime and had come up with any sense of whether you thought the mind was one or many. If not, you can take that home with you for homework. Have a look, see what you think. Is there one mind? Am I one mind or am I many minds? And what would be the significance of either of those options? If you were many minds, if you were a mind a moment, if you were a mind a minute, if you were a mind, all these different thoughts and ideas that would go through your mind, if they were all your different minds, then how do you make sense of any of them? Because your mind has arisen. Then what happens? Does it stay? If it's gone, how does it link with the next mind? How do you come over as you with your particular name and who you are, if you've changed every moment and you're not the same and you're another mind altogether? How could you be held responsible for your actions? It wasn't me, that was another mind. And that, as I was thinking about that, I was thinking there was, in the course of this discussion of shepherds, Milarepa and the shepherds, he uses different terms, which I thought was worth looking at. He starts off talking about the mind. So, the shepherd is looking for his mind. And there's no discussion really about what he finds is really with the Milarepa. He doesn't say that's good or that's bad or anything. He just gives him something else to think about. But when we stop and we think to ourselves, our mind, what do we mean? It's quite interesting because, in the DHB we talk about heart and mind, and we have this sort of idea, this is what's most real about me, and what's most important about me is my heart. And it's where my strength is, it's where my intentions are, it's where my feeling of connection with others is. It's like where meaning itself seems to reside. If my heart is all right, then the rest doesn't really matter because it's the heart. And then you look at the mind, there's a tendency to kind of go up and into the mind somehow. But then we do use mind in all sorts of ways. We also use mind for thinking, don't we? It's my mind. I can't stop my mind. My mind keeps going, chattering on. My mind's doing this, my mind's doing that. So it's kind of like, where's that mind? We tend to think it's somewhere here, don't we? Behind the eyes somewhere. Well, a dentist once told me people think they live somewhere behind, so that that's why they hate the dentist so much, because that's where they live, just behind behind there somewhere. Sort of. And it's quite interesting because although the word that in the Tibetan would have been sem, which is the equivalent of chitta, which includes heart as well, the kind of response the shepherd comes up with fits very well with how we talk about mind, which is an interesting thing to think about, isn't it? Sort of like he describes it as, well, he says you can't kill this mind. We talked about that last time, didn't we? That we would use the word mind in that context, I think, as well. We would say, well, if I wanted to kill myself, I would have to kill myself. So that would be one mind here, the one that's doing the killing, and one mind there that I'm killing. So there'd be like two minds. But we would use the word mind in that context, wouldn't we? But there's a problem with that, because if I'd killed that mind, I would still be there, wouldn't I? Because I've just done this killing. So you can't, if you kill, you would still be there. Because although you talk about I will kill my mind, actually, you know, it's not separate. There's not two minds. So which one have you killed and which one's done the killing? Because the one that's done the killing will still be there. It's very interesting, isn't it? Contemplate that. What are we talking about? What do we actually mean by mind? Well, I will kill myself. That's the other thing. Sometimes we're talking about mind, sometimes we're talking about self. And then later on in the story, Milarepa talks about finding, but in the Tibetan it says Chapa, and the name of the shepherd is Sanjay Chap. And when I read the part of the story where Milarepa says, look for Chaba, I thought it meant, because Chaba means protection. So I thought it meant, it's look for the one who takes refuge. And I thought that was a brilliant thing to try to look for. You know, what or who takes refuge? What is actually capable of being protected? And what is there that could be protected even? And what could actually survive? Yeah, what could survive so that it could be protected? So it suggests if you can take refuge, it suggests something survives, something carries on, something isn't destroyed moment by moment. So I thought that was really good. But then when I asked the two Khenpos that I was talking to, Khenpo Nangyal and Drupal Khenpo, they both were quite sure it didn't refer to the one who takes refuge. It refers to Sanjay Chap himself. You know, who or where is Sanjay Chap? So I started experimenting with that and thinking, well, okay, in my case, that would be sort of who or where is Shenpen? Is Shenpen my body or is Shenpen my mind? And that was quite interesting. I would suggest you all do that with your own name. You know, who is Patrizio? Who is Tara? Who's Saran? Is Saran the mind or is Saran the body? And then see if you can come up with some kind of experiential answer to that touches something in you. So I ended up with thinking, I thought looking for the one who takes refuge was well worth doing. As well as who is, you know, looking for Shenpen, or looking for the self, or looking for the mind. You could look for all of those and see if they all end up being the same or they're different. You could even say looking for... Interesting, yes, if you're going to use mind in what sense? So there's... even in that simple question that Milarepa's asking the shepherd, it begs many questions, and it's interesting that the shepherd immediately goes off and comes back with answers. it's quite interesting that he's noticing that there's this two aspects to mind. One part of the mind is trying to pin down and define itself, or is it itself? Like it says, you can't grasp it, you can't pin it down. So what's looking at what to say something like that? Interesting, isn't it? You think, yes, well, I can pin it down. It is blah, whatever definition you were to think of it. It's that knowing part of me. Okay, so is that part that knows that, the knowing part, and the part that's known, is that also the mind? So then you have to really, you can only contemplate it really. This is where the this mindfulness, or just becoming aware of, there is mind, there is such a thing as mind, even though I don't know what it is. So then focusing on that and trying to experience as simply and as directly and accurately as you can what it is you mean when you say mind. It's interesting. You might start to think, well, if you know something, it must mean there's a mind that knows. So you can, how do you know something? And then how do you know there's something that knows the thing that you know? Have you ever tried to do that? It's very unsatisfactory, isn't it? Sort of like an infinite regress. There's something knowing that there's something knowing that there's something knowing that there's something knowing. But that doesn't answer your question, does it? So the shepherd boy is using that mind that we start out with when we ask ourselves that question. Well, is the mind the one that knows that? Or is the mind the one that knows the mind that knows that? Or is the mind the one that goes on again, an infinite regress? And if it's not, if that's not how it is, how do I know I have a mind? And what is it? How is it? You try to see it and it can't be seen, because as soon as you're seeing it, it's not it, is it? It's something seen. So even if I were to say it's knowledge, the knowledge isn't the mind. The mind is what has the knowledge. And if you call that the mind, it's knowledge. It's not what has the knowledge. So how do you... it's almost as if you could only be the mind, couldn't you? You couldn't see it. It's like sometimes they say you can't... the eye can't see itself because it is the eye that's doing the seeing. It can't see itself. Although it's not a perfect image for the mind, because it's a physical thing, isn't it? So the shepherd has obviously tried very hard all night. He's saying, try to understand it. I can't. Because of the same kind of problems I've just been talking about that come up very quickly. You don't have to be trained in this. And even a child could come up with these kind of answers. Kind of. Never tried it with a child, but I'm sure they could. It doesn't require any pre-knowledge beyond your experience right here and now. When you think of it as an existing entity, which of course that's not very childlike language, but if you think it is something, and you think, okay, that's my mind, I'm going to put it to one side, you can't, because it is you, isn't it? You can't separate yourself from your mind. And then if you think, well, I don't think the mind is anything. You know, I've looked, I can't find the mind, I don't think the mind is anything. I don't think it's anything at all. I mean, some Westerners think that, don't they? They think, well, you know, there's just the brain. The mind is just something, there isn't anything separate that's the mind. But, you know, even if you said that to yourself, well, there's nothing there that's the mind, it wouldn't have answered any of your questions or problems, would it? Because you'd still be suffering from what your mind was doing. If your mind was getting angry or upset or frightened or anything, just saying, well, there isn't such a thing as mind isn't going to help, is it? It's kind of, yeah, it's just a kind of sophisticated intellectual I don't know, contrivance of some kind to say there isn't a mind. Sort of, so what? That's, my mind keeps running on, and my mind is causing me all these problems. You tell me there isn't a mind, but that doesn't help. So then, you know, he starts to kind of get a little bit more, go into it a bit more deeply, and he says, whatever it is, it's illuminating and aware. Like if this doesn't know anything, it doesn't have any awareness, you can't show it anything. It wouldn't be able to see it, it wouldn't be able to know it in any way. There's no way I could get it to understand anything. But mind, if something's got a mind, if something has a mind, then it can understand things, it can know things. We tend to call that light, don't we? Sort of associate that with light, illumination. So if something's been illuminated, something's been... Obviously, if it was a sound or a smell, you wouldn't use illuminating. But it's a visual image, isn't it, illuminating? But, you know, you could feel light, it's got heat, hasn't it? And maybe you could even hear light if maybe it has got a sound. Maybe there is something that's responding to something, which we're talking about here. And it's awake. It's you can wake it up because it's there. It can be woken up. You know, wake up. It's not going to, is it? But if there's something with mind there, you can wake it up. Come on, wake up. At least to some extent. And yet you can't. You know, if you try to say what it is in any comprehensible way, you know, in any sensible way, you can say, well, the mind is. It isn't it, really. And how do you know? Because you know the mind, you know. You know what we're talking about. And you know anything that you describe as mind is not mind. Anyway, Shepherd was kind of making these observations about his mind, that it was not an easy job to come back and tell Milarepa what his mind was. So what does he do? He begs Milarepa to, tell him, give me the answer. I want the answer. I can't work it out, so give me the answer. And this is very much what is called the pointing out instructions within the oral transmission lineage. Milarepa sets him the question, sends him away to go and look at it. He struggles with it, and at some point the teacher comes to the rescue, if you like, with not so much to the rescue, but uses that opportunity to point something out to you. So you have to you have to work on this question of, what is my mind? What is it? Is it one or is it many? Where is it in relationship to my... No, that's the next one with the body. It's this one just for whether it's one or many. So he goes further than just saying it's one, because he answers that quite quickly, that it must be one. But then he goes on looking for it. What is it that I'm saying is one? It's this illuminating, aware something that knows things. This is what I'm calling the one. But I don't know what it is. Help. And then Milarepa sings this song. I think we did this last time, didn't we, with the song about the sugar. This is an image that Khenpo Rinpoche often uses in his teachings, that when you're tasting sugar, how do you know that taste of sugar? Now you can probably distinguish it from salt. That's salt. That's sugar. How do you know? Interesting, isn't it? Very, very simple example. You could say, well, I've tasted it before. You could say that. That's probably why you can give it a name. But even if you couldn't give it a name, you could probably tell the difference between salt and sugar, probably. Because you can experience it, can't you? You experience, that's bitter. You may not have names for them, but you'd still know that was sweet. Oh, that was that one. Yeah, don't want too much of that. Oh. You can tell. You can tell in a very direct way. And he could have used any example. It could have been, how do you know something's hard or soft? How do you know something's smooth or rough? How do you know if a sound is high or low? Now, how do you know? Any of the senses. How do you know that's green and not red? How do you tell? How do you know even if you were to call it something else, you would know that red experience is red and the green experience is green. We know, don't we? We just know. There's nothing more to it, really. We can then start giving it names and comparing it and communicating about it, but actually we just know. This is what Milarepa is saying. It's the same with the true nature of our, in this case he's using the word mind. We know. But we may not realise we know. It could be that somebody could point out to you that you knew. That would be the pointing out instruction. Because you might have, it's like looking for your glasses when you've got them on your nose. And somebody points out to you, well actually, you're looking for your glasses, but they're on your nose. Oh yes, you must have known all along because you can see through them, but you can get confused. So we're like that. So he sings this wonderful song about another person can point it out to you, but even then, you've got to work on that. Somebody can wake you up enough for you to recognise, I do know the nature of my mind, but then you're just going to forget again. It's going to be it's just going to be a moment of recognition, and then you've got to accustom yourself to that. So you've got to be able to point that out to yourself. You've got to be able to recognise it for yourself on cue, when you want to recognise it, to be able to recognise it. And then that becomes knowledge as opposed to an experience. Like somebody might, you might be listening to me or reading some Dharma book or something, and or meditating, and you get we use this word flash, you get a sort of a flash of something, of recognition. Oh, that must be it. And then almost immediately it's gone, because you've kind of tried to hold on to it in some way. So how did that happen? How did I get that glimpse? You start thinking, how can I recreate the conditions that could happen again? And you have to get the right touch with that, because if you try too hard, all your thinking just gets in the way. But if you just let it go by and don't even value it and don't even think about it again, who knows when it might arise again. In a way, you have to work on creating the right conditions for it to arise again, and then relax. So that takes a lot of skill, a lot of faith, and a lot of practice, really. But here he says, if you take what you've learned, I think there's another translation of that, if you take that you've glimpsed and you work with that, you will definitely realise the true nature of your mind, because that is the true nature of your mind. There's no reason why you shouldn't actually realise it completely. So then the boy says, please give me instruction. Give me this pointing out instruction. So he now realises, he needs Milarepa to point him out the nature of mind. When we ask for this pointing out instruction, we haven't a clue what we're saying, really, do we? I want a pointing out instruction. I want to know what my mind is, what my nature is. Do something. Do something. Make it happen. So Milarepa says, very well, when you get home, look for the colour of your mind. Interestingly, this is the exact it's exactly what Kamatini Rinpoche told me to do when I arrived in India and was living in Tilokpur and in the nunnery there. Kamatini was there, and it was very difficult to pin him down. He's like the mind itself really. Very hard to pin him down. If you wanted him to answer your questions, he would talk about something else, and then suddenly he would say something to you that sometimes I used to think he was just being silly, but at the same time there was something about him that made me think, no, I really want to know I want to work that out, whether he's just messing around or whether this is something serious in what he's just said. And I remember him saying to me, what colour's your mind? Walking down to this little bathing pool. There's a lovely little idyllic bathing pool in the river. I used to go down and start washing and swimming around. What colour's your mind? So I said, you look. So I did. And of course I thought it was a silly question, there's no doubt. Nonetheless, I was interested why it was silly. Because I didn't think of my mind having one colour. That couldn't be right. But then I thought to myself, but where else is colour? The colour, it's like my mind takes on the colour of what I see. That was my best shot. He went on from there, but you might come up with say something else. So what did the shepherd come up with? He said, what colour is it? And what shape? I never looked for the shape, but I think if I had looked for the shape, I mean, my initial thing would be, well, it doesn't have a shape because the mind isn't something that has a colour or a shape. But then if I was going to say that, what was I going to say it was then? You know, like, so it helped me focus. Having this question that I thought was silly helped me focus on what I thought was sensible, which wasn't easy. If that's silly, what's sensible? What if it doesn't have a shape? Then what is it then? You know, you can say, well, wind doesn't have a shape, does it? There's lots of things that don't have a shape. Space doesn't have a shape. So am I saying it's like wind and it's like space? Yeah, maybe I am. Yeah, you need to kind of consider that. It's not. And then where in your body is it? That's an interesting one. My mind is in my body. Well, you know, I think most Westerners will say, well, my mind is in my brain, obviously. But if it is, then, you know, how is your finger moving? You say, oh, well, you know, that's the neurons and things. But actually, experientially, I don't experience neurons and things. I can actually, and you know, when you go to workshops and things that are using awareness and mindfulness, they'll say things like, you put your awareness in your fingers, and you do that. What if you do it now? Just put your awareness in your fingers. With your right hand. Would you say your mind was doing something in your hand? I have to say, definitely have a sense that my mind is moving around in my hand, and my hand is actually, I don't know quite what the relationship is, because as I move my attention or awareness or mind, then the hand moves or has sensations that correspond. Okay, forefinger, little finger, thumb. Definite sensation that applies, that corresponds to where I put my mind. You could play with that endlessly. If your mind wasn't in your body, how would that happen? But if your mind was actually in your body, how could you ever get outside your body? You know, you're not trapped in your body, are you? You live in the world. You don't live in your body. You do live in your body in a sense, but there's also the world, isn't there? Your mind is there as well. Or is it? Does your mind stop at the edge of your body? This is one of the mysterious things that when I think, well, okay, I can't actually move the space around that's outside. I can't move things around that are outside of contact with my body. But my awareness can go out, it can go through things, it can go to there's actually no limit. I can't find a place where there's a stop sign that says the mind goes no further. You know, I can go out to the universe. Emotionally, something happens where I think I can't go any further. I sort of think, oh no, I can't go any further. But that's just something here that's kind of, it's almost, it doesn't want to go any further. it's become too big and unmanageable. So, but actually there's no stop sign anywhere, there's no boundary anywhere. And then I love to do this. I sort of try to go into the whole of the galaxy like you've been taught. You know, you watch these documentary films about the universe, and it's vast. Or even you just look up at the sky at night and you see all the stars and everything, and it's already vast, and it's nothing compared with what we hear about it. But also, since there's no stop sign anywhere, there's no reason to think there's some place where it all stops. Even if you didn't know anything about modern discoveries about the nature of space. A very interesting question is, okay, there's that space full of planets and the Earth and everything. And there's my mind space that doesn't have any limit. But what's the connection between the two? Help me, Loretta, tell me the answer. Look, what is that I'm asking? What is that? The reason why we're so puzzled is because we're asking a question that arises from assumptions we've made about the nature of our mind and the universe. And because the assumptions are wrong, the question it's not quite the right question. But you have to keep pushing at it until you recognise the assumption behind the question, and then there's a kind of something can suddenly open up, probably only briefly. Could be quite shocking, but if it's brief enough, it's not too bad. But then, of course, if it's brief, sometimes it's not easy to really recognise what that was significant. It might just feel like a funny feeling. You suddenly got a funny feeling without realising, oh, that was really significant. It was something opening up, something dropping away. Round is a good suggestion, isn't it? I always think round is, spherical is a good suggestion, because when you're trying to explore, as I was saying, you explore outside the space, how far your mind can go into, just go, and you try in every direction. You try forwards, you try backwards, and you try right, and you try left, and then up and down in all directions, and there's no reason to think that any direction is different from any other. They all go on the same amount. You could go on and on and on in every direction in the same amount. So it would kind of produce a sphere, wouldn't it? A sphere without an edge around it. Or what else? What else could be true? What else might be going on? If that isn't right, it is going on. Anyway, where in your body is it? Well, if it's vast like that, how could it be in the body? So there's a problem again, isn't there? In fact, any thought that's bigger than your body, how does it get in? How is it there? Where is it? Where's the screen? With a visual thing, you can think, well, the screen is on the back of the eye, isn't it? And so things go in there. But actually, that isn't the screen, because the back of the eye can't tell you anything. It's got to be, it's not too sure what even if you look at the brain, it's sending messages, but to whom? Who's receiving the messages? Where's the reception, the actual, where this whole, if you like, the screen is, not only the screen, but the one watching the screen. Where's that? You could have all the computers in the world, but they wouldn't tell you anything unless you had some kind of mind to read it and know it. Otherwise, they're just sending messages, but nothing's receiving the messages. So it's kind of, what is information when it's not informing anything or anyone? It's a really interesting thought, isn't it? Well, how did the shepherd get on? The shepherd boy got when he comes back, he did have a look, and he says again, like a bit like he said the day before, there's a spelling mistake here, a typo. The before unmoving should be crossed out. It's part 3, the second paragraph, beginning of the second paragraph. It's clear, vivid, moving, and ungraspable. Has no colour or shape. So he's decided about that. Has no colour or shape. That's all he can say. Doesn't have a colour, doesn't have a shape. Doesn't have a colour. Doesn't have a shape. Could it be any colour? Could it be any shape? Is colour and shape something different from the mind? Or what is colour and shape then if it's not the mind? Well, that's a problem, is there, isn't there? But anyway, that's as far as he's got here. When it links with the eyes, it sees. And when it links with the ears, it hears. With the nose, it smells. With the tongue, it tastes and talks. And with the feet, it walks. If the body's agitated, it too is stirred up. I wasn't too sure of that translation, but I think that was right. Normally the mind, so okay, I think we'd all go along with that, wouldn't we? That, that's your mind. That if you smell goes into the nose, but it has to, the mind has to receive that. You could say brain, but we don't really know brain. I mean, brain is if you like, an extension of the smelling organ, isn't it? But what is it that does the smelling through the smelling organ? It's the mind smells, or the mind could switch its attention and it could taste, or it could switch its attention and it could hear, or it could switch and it could feel a sensation, and then it could switch its attention and wonder, can I attend to all those things at once? Like it can do that, can't it? And it can talk. You can't talk without a mind, can you? Amazing. I just think something and the tongue does it. I'm thinking, I wonder what I'm going to say next. I'm just saying it to myself in my mind. Okay, now I'm going to tell my tongue to do it. If I think about it, I can't do it. What am I going to say? What am I going to say next? It's funny, isn't it? So that something called that I'm calling my mind is doing that. Okay, so now he changes tack a bit. He's just wondered about that, but he hasn't really come up with anything definite. Then he notices this body. Where in the body is it? So instead of saying where in the body it is, he sort of said, well, it goes to the senses. But normally the mind, then he's thinking about the mind as a whole. And you usually think, okay, my mind is in my body and my mind tells my body what to do. And then the body does it. And that's, yeah, of course, that sounds great. But that's only when the body is in good condition. If the body is old and decayed or something's wrong with it, then the relationship between the mind and body starts to kind of break up. It starts to come in conflict. The body won't do what my mind tells me to do. Like my father used to say that as he grew old. He said, I used to think I could lift this, I could lift a boat. But I thought I thought that's what my body did. But actually then he realised, actually the mind did it the same as before, but the body didn't do it the same as before. That they were kind of parting company. He could do the same movement as he did before, but now he couldn't lift the boat anymore. So he kind of was intrigued by this. The mind and the body was kind of parting company. Wasn't going according to his command. And eventually, according to the body's way of thinking, the mind leaves the body, but even we know that at night when we fall asleep, the mind leaves the body. The mind goes off and does lots of things. You might think, well, it hasn't gone anywhere. But since we don't know where it is in the first place, we're not in a position to say it hasn't gone anywhere. But certainly the body is just lying still. So that as it said, the mind will leave it behind without a thought. Oh yes, when you die, you just leave the body behind. Of course, as Westerners, we might not take that as a given. You might think, well, maybe when you die, the mind stops. Well, yeah. If we knew what the mind was, we might be able to say that. But to say it would stop, we'd have to know for sure what it was in the first place, which we don't know what it is, and we don't even know it's in the body. In fact, we can't really understand how it could be in the body. So then to say, well, it stops when the body stops, well, how would we know? I mean, what grounds have we for thinking that? Well, I just like that to be true. Well, yeah, maybe, but where did it come from? Where's it going? What is it? If you can't answer that, you can't really say it's common sense to think it stops. Well, you never saw it start. Why should you think it stops? I mean, there's nothing common sense about it. It's just you can get away with that way of thinking if you're not in a Buddhist culture. If you're in a Buddhist culture, they won't let you get away with that. They say, well, you know, the body clearly changes and becomes a corpse. It's no longer joined to the mind. This you can say, and you abandon the body. It's quite funny, this stone cleaning yourself thing, isn't it? We went into that in some detail. Apparently, when there's no toilet paper, you can use a stone, I guess, to scrape yourself clean, I suppose. It's a funny image, isn't it? It's very Tibetan. So on the other hand, the body doesn't remain quiet and submissive, but frequently gives trouble. Yes, so even before you die, the body can start having all sorts of pains and doing strange things, and actually causes suffering to the mind. So again, they must be two different things. The mind and the body must be different things. They've got some relationship, but it isn't just that my mind is in my body and the body does what I want it to do. The body's and the mind, there's something going on, but what do I mean by body anyway? I mean, that comes up a bit later. So he kind of realises that there is this thing, the mind, which is the important point here. You could say this is mindfulness of mind. You know, that there is a mind. I barely know what it is, yet there has to be something mind, because there's this relationship going on with the body. Well, there is mind and body. But help, I don't know. I don't know what it is. So then the Milarepa does an interesting move here. This is something I wanted to talk to you about, that in the Buddhist tradition as a whole, the whole issue of mind, of self, of our true nature, these are all spoken of in separate contexts, depending on what particular message or teaching is being conveyed at that particular level. And it's interesting that Milarepa goes straight from the confusion and lack of clarity about what is mind. I mean, all that in the whole story, Sanji Chab, the shepherd, only ever reports back that he doesn't know, basically. It can't be this, it can't be that. I don't know, help. And Milarepa, towards the end of the story, he says, well, that, if you like, that not knowing or not being able to find an answer to that is realizing the not self of the person. So it's a kind of realization. So, you know, Sanji Chab doesn't sort of think, oh, I've had a realization. He thinks, I don't know. I can't report anything. In any way I think about it doesn't make sense. When Milarepa has to point out to him, that is a realization. That's a realization. That's the realization of the not self of the person. You know, you can't find anything that corresponds to what you are experiencing as a person. If you want to, and this is where he makes a leap, really. He goes straight from that first pointing out and looking for the nature of mind to telling him, well, if you want to know the true nature of reality, I suppose you'd have to say, if you want to know the true nature, the not self of the dharmas, which is an interesting turn of phrase, but if you want to really know your nature, you have to know the nature of all phenomena. And if you want to know that, you're going to need to receive the blessing and empowerment from a guru, a teacher. You're not, you know, that's what you're going to need. And you're going to need to practice, you're going to need to follow me for 12 years to come to an understanding of that. And you have to have faith. You have to be able to follow. You have to be able to follow instructions. You have to be able to trust. So it's a huge leap from I don't know anything to gotcha. Okay, now you have to, if you really want to know anything more, you need to really knuckle down and practice in the way I'm going to direct you. And if not, then stop asking questions. Because you're not going to get your answers. So just go off and play. You know, there's no, you know, you're not going to get any answers. You're going to need that. Which is a huge leap, isn't it? There's this, and of course in the story, he's a very gifted pupil, and he renounces everything, goes off and lives with Milarepa, and ends up being very, very successful at his meditation and becomes enlightened. So it's a happy, happy ending to the story. But when I was reading it, I was thinking of all the different teachings I've received and the teachings that I give, and I'm thinking, what was Milarepa then doing with this student? First, he's just asking him these questions, which we can look at more. And then from there, where he says, I can't find anything, help, he says, that is the realization of not self of the person. So now you need to go the whole hog you really want to know the nature of reality, if you like, then you're going to have faith. You're going to have to open up. You're going to have to be receptive. You're going to have all the qualities that are necessary to receive the true, the true realization, to be open enough to receive it, and for it to dawn on you, if you like. And you need to be empowered to receive it. That in your ordinary state of confusion, you wouldn't be able to receive it because you're too confused. You need to be made a fit vessel, as they put it, that can receive the realization. And there's a lot of emphasis put on that in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, of preparing yourself to receive the transmission so that it can actually, the conditions are right then for you to be able to realize something which in some ways is so obvious there's nothing you can do about it. It's full of these kind of ironies. So I thought at this point I was thinking about it and thinking, well, not self of the person is a real contentious issue among Buddhists. It has always been. Where was it? Page 24, yes. So I thought I'd just finish by running through self and not self in Buddhist discourse, because it's a source of a lot of confusion. So first of all, you have to say the most important teaching on self that the Buddha gave was that there is a self, and that it's really important to protect it, because this is what is creating, has the power, if you like, to do actions that will bring good results. So it's really important to have a sense that yes, I can practice generosity, I can practice discipline, I can practice patience, I can practice with energy, I can practice concentration, I can have, and through all of that I can have this, I can have the penetrating insight and find liberation for myself. So you have to believe that there's a self that can do all that and gain liberation. And if you don't do all that and gain liberation, then you will be caught up in all these negative emotions that cause you to act unskillfully, that get you into more and more trouble. And that trouble, it doesn't end with this life, and it didn't begin with this life. It carries on until you gain liberation. So there has to be some kind of, what other word would you use for it? Then that is, that's self. I mean, if I said it was Shempen, it's only Shempen from, for the odd 80 years, like however long I live. It isn't Shempen after I've died. It's me, it's myself, that's carrying on. You could say, well, what is that? Yeah, that's a good question. What is that? And I make lots of wrong assumptions about what that is, but it's fundamental. If there wasn't that, there wouldn't be any suffering even. There wouldn't be any path to liberation, there wouldn't be any wisdom. Well, there wouldn't be anything. So is that self the same as the mind? Or of course it depends if you're using self or mind differently, but we do tend to say, I think things with my mind, or I have a body and mind. So whether ultimately they're not different, certainly from where we are now they're different, aren't they? So would that, if you transplanted my brain, would that still be myself? Would that still be me? It's an important question, isn't it? For all your friends as well. Would it still be? Would it still be Tara? Would it still be Dashu? You know, that means something. It's very important. It's very important to not to think that that's irrelevant. So why am I even making this point? I mean, who would ever think that was irrelevant? Well, often Buddhists do. They say, well, there is no self. What can they possibly be saying? Well, didn't the Buddha teach there's no self? How many of you think the Buddha taught there's no self? Oh, right. Right. Anybody else? Yeah. It's everywhere, isn't it? It's in all books on Buddhism it says that there's no self. Or then, why is this issue? Why has this come up as an issue? Why would anyone think that the Buddha said there was no self? Because he did say what was not the self. He said the skandhas are not the self. They're not the self, and why? Because they're impermanent, cause of suffering, they're suffering. And that's basically it, really. Conditioned, you could say they're conditioned, but there's nothing, you know, what we grasp, when we're grasping onto our body and we're grasping onto our mind as ourself, that's basically what the skandhas are. It's the body, feeling, perceptions, thought formations and consciousnesses, or moments of consciousness, or whatever it is you think that is. So there's a kind of, I've lost track of what I was saying. Trying to remember the list of skandhas. I forgot what I was saying. What was I saying?
Skandhas are not so.
Yeah, they're not. So they're, the body and mind are, you can't pin them down and say those are the self, and yet we're very attached to them as if they were the self. Like, I'm very, very worried about my body because I think that's my body, that's me. So if it's going to die, I'm sort of very anxious because it's, you know, that's me, I'm going to die. So I've obviously identified with my body. But I've also identified with my mind, because then I can start thinking, well, my body dies, but maybe my mind will still be alive. So I start to think, well, somebody said to me, well, you're going to lose your mind. I would think, gosh, you know, that's me. I wouldn't be me anymore, because I would be losing, I wouldn't be able to remember anything, I wouldn't be able to think anything. You know, how would I be me anymore? Would I still be me? So all the various manifestations of mind I tend to think of as me. So when that's, you know, when that's shown, you know, if that's threatened by some disease or something, what's left that's me? You sort of think, well, it's quite interesting how you'd look at that. I've kind of jumped ahead of myself, because instead of going straight to that which I'm talking about now, which is perhaps what you might call the Shravaka view of the not self in the skandhas, if I, you know, looking at how Milarepa was able to teach the shepherd, and I was thinking, well, if I was teaching, you know, if I'm teaching Dharma, would I use his method? And I think, well, that seems to me to be a very gifted student who could do what the shepherd did. That we need to work through stages. So having first of all acknowledged to myself, even though I might not give it as a teaching, I've acknowledged to myself that we have to start from the assumption of self, that we all have self, and that we can all talk about the true nature of ourself, and we can also talk about what isn't ourself. So it has to be a kind of given that we all understand what self means, as it's important. And we do, we do think that, don't we? We think it's really important to be ourself, to be genuine. You don't want to just be an automaton. You want to be yourself. You want to be expressing yourself. You want to be true to yourself. Those are important expressions. But you could say, well, what is the true nature of the self? And you could say, a lot of stuff that I think of myself is not myself, can't be myself. And this is actually, if you look carefully at what the Buddha ever said, this is what the Buddha was saying. He didn't say anything beyond that. He didn't say there's no self. So it's not different. It's not a different way of using language or using. It's exactly the same as we would do now. So when I'm teaching in the West, because I know people have a lot of bad associations with themselves, they kind of often don't like themselves and have very strong aspiration to selflessness. They just the idea of being selfless resonates very well, I think, to the Western mind. When you hear that said, what do you think of selflessness? Think, oh, somebody's selfless. Oh, if I were to be selfless. Oh, well, yeah, that would be good. To be selfless would be good. Selfish, yeah, I am selfish. And when other people are selfish, I don't like it. When they're selfless, it's really wonderful. So selfless has got a really nice sense to it, and selfish is what we've been taught from very young not to be, if we're lucky. Kind of, when we were young, oh, that's selfish. Oh, is it? Oh, didn't mean to do that. Didn't mean to be selfish. Kind of like almost bending over backwards not to be selfish. So then you might think, well, I am selfish. So any manifestation of self in me is horrible. It's almost like anything that feels like me is basically something horrible, because it's me. And I think a lot of people are conditioned to think if it's me, it's somehow not very nice. Many people have that kind of sense. Yeah, it's quite common. So because of that, I think we need to start with what is our true nature. Our true nature isn't something horrible. It's actually openness. Completely open, completely unlimited, completely, everything's possible. It's kind of like ungraspable, sort of without any limit, without any. Our true nature is open, complete open. Our true nature is this clarity of awareness. There's nothing wrong with it. It's totally awake and aware, or could be. It could be because it is our true nature. So that awakening aspect within us, that is our true nature. And that longing, if you like, that longing for happiness, realization, liberation, or whatever you call it, that sensitivity, that heart quality that we have. Okay, it may be feeling crushed and thwarted but it's there. We all have that, and that's really important. Okay, when we talk about what is my true nature, we're talking about that, and that never changes. We came with that. It has no quality of change about it. It can't go away. We can't ever get rid of that. That is indestructible. So we can start with a little bit of faith. We can sort of, as Trungpa Rinpoche would say, we could cheer up. If it feels like me, it could be brilliant. It could be completely brilliant. So when we talk about selfishness and self-centeredness and grasping and so on, that's not what we truly are. That's something that's got in the way. If we could actually step out of that, what we truly are is this openness, clarity and sensitivity. Okay, so we're in business. So any thoughts about if it's me, it's horrible, are just wrong. It's just wrong. They're not the truth at all. It's really, really important to recognise that our true nature is openness, clarity, sensitivity. We can have confidence in that. We can learn to relax into that. And relaxing into that, making that choice, automatically causes all those rather unpleasant habits we have to weaken and fall away. So, we don't have to go around hunting them out and hitting them all on the head. We could actually step out of them into our true nature, and they would naturally fall away, like dark disappears in light. So that's good news, isn't it? It's really important to develop that attitude of mind. So having worked on that and developed that attitude of mind, there's a third way of talking about self, which is self-clinging, which I've mentioned in passing, but we need to look at it more closely. Once we've got enough confidence that isn't our self, but it is a distortion of some kind that's getting in the way, then we can start looking at it, with open eyes. We don't need to think, oh no, that's me, I don't want to look. We can think, oh, what's that then? That isn't me, but how come it's posing as if it is? How come, I'm doing this when in fact there's no need? So you now have the confidence to look at all those strange things that we do with our mind. See, I could use mind in there, couldn't I? We use our mind. So sometimes it's not quite the same thing as self. So we do all these strange things. We become attached to, the way we look in such a way that we actually give ourselves a terrible time, and it's completely unnecessary. Or even become attached to people and try to control them in a way that actually just produces suffering from them and ourselves. All sorts of things we get caught up in, or we can have sexual desire which is actually not even pleasure or fun anymore, because it's all about aggression and an insatiable sort of obsessional lust of some kind, so that we can look and we can see for ourselves that we create for ourselves our own prison, and that we don't have to. And that's where teachings about the ego mandala are quite helpful. Learning to deal with the different kind of characters that take over the centre of your personal mandala, and try to rule it, and then noticing them and say hello to them and saying, just step aside, you don't need to take over the whole thing. And in this way we can make friends with all the different parts of ourselves and learn to understand them and maybe integrate them and kind of generally bring a little bit of order into chaos. So those things are always good to do, and Trungpa Rinpoche teaches a lot about how to notice those characters, if you like, in our meditation, make friends with them. You just greet them and let them go, and gradually, layer upon layer of the onion, if you like, of ego protection system, can this sort of start to break down, and we start to lose that fear that's generated by thinking you're caught inside this sort of protective bubble, that actually one could actually open up and one would realise that you didn't need that protective bubble. It was rather a pain, really. So you could let that go. So then that would be a whole different way of talking about mind and self. And I think in this context one would use the word ego rather a lot. Ego is associated with pride, self-importance, egocentricity, selfishness. We use ego like that, don't we, in normal language? But I'm always a little uncomfortable when we say, well, there is no ego, because in a funny way, what you're saying there is that right at the heart of what you're clinging on to, there's nothing. You're not clinging on to anything except your own blindness. By not looking properly, you're clinging, thinking you're protecting something, but then when you look, if you let go of all the clinging, you weren't protecting anything, because what you truly were doesn't need protecting. So it's kind of funny, it kind of works in that context to say, you look at all your ego clinging and you find, oh, there's no self there. There is no self there. Or there's no ego there. You could use that. So that language, you could use it in that context, couldn't you? It'd be meaningful in that context. You have quite a shock effect. Oh, there is no ego there. There is no self there. I'm not protecting anything. But that's not the whole story. That's not as if to say, okay, so now you've disappeared off the face of the earth, because what happens when you realise that is your qualities start to shine forth more strongly. Your presence, other people can feel your presence very strongly, and it's a really good, they feel it in a very wonderful way. Even though from your side you feel you've just realised that you didn't exist. But if you then grab that as a view, oh, well, I don't exist, that's even worse confusion. The Buddha always said, don't cling to views, and especially don't cling to this view of I don't exist, because it's very negative. If you think I don't exist, you're not going to be able to function, even for your own benefit, let alone anyone else's. It's a very wrong view to think I don't exist, except, as I said, in that context as a kind of, what I was protecting is not there. But I don't exist, that's just another view, and it's a very negative view, very, very negative view. Because how are you going to, how is that your true nature going to express itself if you're already sort of crushing it with this idea, I don't exist, which goes very strongly with I don't exist, I don't matter, blah, blah, blah. I mustn't say anything, I'm the doormat, It's really not a useful way of thinking at all. It's quite subtle, isn't it? It's quite subtle, because it's a different context. So I reckon at this point, where you've actually seen through that egocentric protective shell, and you're sort of starting to let that go, that openness, clarity, sensitivity will automatically start to shine forth more. And then I think you really do need to look for more precision in exactly what it is you're realising. And you need to realise the two things. You need to realise what isn't real about everything, including the universe, and also what is real about the universe and myself, about me, myself and the universe. Or I won't realise what the true nature of myself is until I realise the true nature of the universe. Which is quite interesting, isn't it? This is what Milarepa's saying. She's quite advanced. But certainly we need that. We need to be able to make that distinction, and that's where the Shravika view that I just started on starts to kick in, because you then can look at your body, you can look at your feelings, you can look at your perceptions, you can look at your thought processes, you can look at your consciousness. I must say, when I was in retreat this year looking at the skandhas again, because I was going to give this course on progressive stages of meditation on emptiness, I thought, oh, I haven't done it. I haven't done it for years and years, so I'll do it. And I found myself less and less able to distinguish between any of the skandhas. I could, for the first instant, say, oh, this is body, this is feeling, this is perception, this is thought formations, this is consciousness. But the more I would look carefully at any of it, it all came out the same. It all came out like, how do I know I have a body? Then it was like, because I could feel it, and it was a pleasant feeling. So I couldn't really tell, was that a pleasant feeling or was that my body? And the same with perception. Like, is that my body or is it perception? I wouldn't know my body without perception. So what's the difference? And then the formations, thought formations, I wouldn't be able to perceive anything unless there were formations there already that told me what things were. You can't perceive something if you don't know what it. If you don't know it's there, you can't. There's done many experiments on this, haven't they? That you have to already be able to recognise something for you to be able to perceive it. Well, all sorts of funny areas around that. And then I thought of consciousness as being the last ditch stand of something that could be real. Because if you can see everything else is impermanent and changing, then that couldn't be the real, what you really were. So then you're left with consciousness itself. Am I just consciousness? And then if you look at consciousness and you think of the framework of time and space, if you think of time, and even if you're just sitting in meditation trying to be aware of your awareness, if you like, or your mind or your thinking, you immediately have this conundrum of, is this thought I'm looking at a thought I just had? Or is it the thought I'm having this moment? And how would I know? I have to recall it to look at it, but then it's gone. Don't know, has anybody played with that one? How many people have played with that one? Some of you, yeah. So it's like, what is the consciousness? Is it, if you divided it up into moments, that can't be right. But if you don't, well, why don't I know everything? Why is it all gone? Like, and it can't have all gone, because if it had all gone, how would it arise now? It's true, isn't it? The past had really all gone. All gone. How would we know now? How would now arise? Out of what? Everything that's the whole complexity of the world. How would it survive from the past that's gone into now? Something seriously wrong, isn't there? Something seriously wrong. So this, you realise, what am I calling consciousness then? I have this idea, consciousness knows something. There's the whole, it's conscious of something that's different from itself. And this is what's called vijnana. It's divided into the consciousness and what you're conscious of. So if you struggle with it enough, if you just stay with it in your meditation enough, and you allow that the problematic nature of that vijnana to reveal itself, you might get a flash of what would be called jnana, which is a different way of knowing. And the vijnana would be like, it become evident to you when you were, if you like, vijnanaing. You know, I'm vijnanaing, I'm making that division, I can notice I'm making that division, and I'm getting a tiny sort of hint or glimpse of another way of knowing that isn't that. I'm doing it with my fingers because I can't think what to call it. And this is interesting, this is what Milarepa tells the shepherd boy in this next song. That was all to introduce this next line of the song. You thought I'd forgotten, didn't you? No, here we go. So, at the separation of awareness and the physical body, vijnana is the great culprit. So, here he's talking about when you die. You leave the body behind, but the vijnana carries on. This, whatever it is we're doing, when we don't recognise jnana, if we recognise jnana at that time, as the body died, the jnana would just stay the same. It would just be, you know, well, they say it appears as a great clear light. That's assuming you haven't realised it before you die. But it's very easy to realise it when you die, even if you haven't realised it completely. If you've realised it almost in your life, then when you die, this experience of the jnana comes through so strongly and you recognise it, you're liberated. But good, wouldn't it? But you have to be a really good yogin for that to happen. Normally what happens is, because we're still clinging, even though we've got glimpses, we're still a very strong habit to cling on to our body, and to our consciousness, and to our, to this vijnana. It's a very strong habit. So when that dissolving happens and the clear light breaks through, then our avidya, our power to not recognise it, kicks in. And we actually experience something more like deep sleep, which of course a lot of people hope, oh, it's going to be deep sleep, good. But unfortunately you wake up out of it and everything goes on. So if you don't know how to handle that, you're not in a very good situation. But if you've been practicing Dharma all your life and you know how to handle that, that's a good moment to practice, because you're not hampered by having a sort of physical body to kind of pin you down. So apparently that's a really good time to practice. So I'm thinking that I probably will go out like a light when I die, but when I come round it will be a great time to practice. So I should I look forward to that. So anyway, it's this vijnana that's the culprit. He goes straight into that. It's like he doesn't give him any sort of gradual stages. He goes straight into that. It's the cause of having to experience the suffering of the lower realms of samsara. Do you want to abandon samsara by turning around and going to the land of the higher realms and liberation? If you want to go, I will guide you. So there's the the shepherd is obviously well primed, and he says straight off that he wants to go. Shepherd begged him. He begged him to guide him. So at that point, Milarepa asks his name. And then how old he is. He's 16. I'd forgotten that. It's so funny. I wrote that down, but I forgot it. He's 16. So then he gave him refuge and explained the benefits of the refuge. And then he said, from now on, ceaselessly take refuge, and this evening try to find out which or what is Chapa. And this was the question that I told you about. That I translated it as the one who takes refuge, and I was having a great time looking for the one who took refuge, until the Kempos told me, no, I should have been looking for Shempen. But I thought it was good doing, I thought they were both good. Slightly different. So you can try that. So tell me the result tomorrow. So there you are. We've got through part 3. Does anyone want to ask anything? Yes?
It's about protection.
Mm.
At some point you were saying about ego clinging and the sense of protecting ego,
Mm-hmm.
and then realizing there's nothing to protect
Right,
because our true nature doesn't need protection.
right,
So that's one thing.
yes,
And then about this chapa,
yeah,
you were saying there is something that needs protecting, something that goes for refuge, that is
yes.
worth protecting. So can you tell that something worth protecting, and then our true nature that doesn't need protection, how those two fit together?
On the path, then we do need to protect our true self from these habits that are obscuring it all the time. So we need to build some mandala to hold all those habits at bay. It's a bit like Boko Rinpoche used the image of, you've got a little seed growing in a middle of a highway. So you put a strong fence around it so it doesn't get trampled. This is a nice image. That that little flash of realization, if it's not going to be overwhelmed completely by the habits that make it so you don't notice it, you've got to give it a big space where it can, it is protected. And then every time you get that flash, then it's recognised and nurtured. Otherwise, it's just trampled all over by our habits and it can't grow. Does that make sense?
Is it like an irony, in a way? Because
Yes.
there's like a gradual path, but
Yes.
it needs protection and
Yes.
practice, and then already it's pure in itself, and
Exactly.
it doesn't need protection in that sense.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. So that we need to arrive at the realization of there was no need for this path. From the very beginning, there was absolutely no need for the path. That's why in the Heart Sutra it says there is no path. Because when the bodhisattvas actually get to the level where they could realize this, they often can't see what to do, because it would mean abandoning their idea that they had to follow a path, and that's what they've been doing for so long and been so successful at. Now they have to abandon that very idea, which is extremely hard to do. That's why they need to have a lot of faith. This is the Buddha telling you, abandon the path, abandon the raft. The Buddha used the raft image, didn't he? You don't carry the raft once you get to the other side. But there's a very strong tendency to want to carry the raft because it's helped you so much. So it helps if from the very beginning you recognise that irony. If from the very beginning you recognise, I'm following a path, I'm doing all this stuff to protect myself, I'm taking refuge to protect myself, but the true realisation would be that I don't need protecting. So then that must make it easier to drop it when you need to, mustn't it? And to have the right attitude. Because if you think you really need protecting, it's going to be very difficult to let go of your ego clinging, isn't it? So it's kind of an irony there, because it's people who say, well, you know, I think it's all one and I don't think there's any need for refuge. And you think, well, in a way, you're right. And then you watch what happens to them, and of course they drift off because there's no structure there holding them. And then you see other people who think, oh, you know, the Buddhas are so wonderful and I've taken refuge and I love the Buddhas so much and oh, I've got so much devotion, and you know, they're getting more and more egocentric by the minute. So, you know, you can always turn whatever teaching it is into something to harm yourself instead of helping you, unfortunately.